Well, welcome again to another episode of Christian Answers, where we try to answer contemporary questions about Christian faith, about culture, about morality, about ultimate truth. We try to answer questions about God, the Bible, science, how faith and culture relate. And so we tackle some of the issues that are out there in the news, and we try to come at them from a Christian perspective. Well, today I would like to talk about a program that was airing on TNT called Proof. And the series is about the quest for life after death, evidence for life after death. And it's a very interesting series, and the topic is fascinating because even in a secular society like we live in, people still want to know what happens when you die. Is there life after death, or do you just go to the grave and stay there forever in the dirt? And so the question of immortality and the question of life after death and reality beyond this life, those are all pertinent questions that our culture still asks, even though it is a secular and becoming even more secular culture. These are good questions. So when I saw that TNT was planning on a series called Proof, that the whole premise of the series is proof for life after death. Is there proof or is there not proof? And so I was fascinated by it. I anticipated the series. I followed when the series would begin, and when it began, I watched every single episode. I think there were about 8 or 9 episodes of Proof, and I have watched them, and now the first season is over. They're trying to determine whether they want to renew the series based on the ratings. It did receive good ratings at first. It dipped a little bit and came back up at the end, so we'll just have to see if this series is going to be renewed for a second season. But I think it should be, because it's something that our culture needs to hear, it needs to talk about, needs to discuss, needs to think about, because even in our materialistic, secular society, the human heart cries out for more than just materialism and money and this life. The human heart wants to know, ultimately, God, the Creator, and wants to know about life after death and all the other important topics that life consists of. Life is simply not just on the horizontal plane. There is the vertical plane. The Bible talks all about this. As Christians, we know all about this. But our culture, it seems, the people, the population in general, they have forgotten these truths. And so we need to bring them back before the consciousness of our population. And this program is a great tool to do that. So I hope that you have had an opportunity to watch some of the episodes of Proof. And if you haven't, I hope that you might even take the opportunity to find it, whether it's on DVD or on the internet or someplace, and check out some of these episodes of Proof, because it definitely is dealing with a topic that as Christians we deal with all the time when we read the Bible. When we hear God's Word, He deals with the topic of life after death, especially in the New Testament, all the time. And so we want to be up on that. We want to help other people understand it, and we want to be able to articulate our own hope for life to come. So let me play a trailer from the TV series Proof, and then I'd like to comment a little bit more about this. So let's roll this trailer and see what it says.
What if life is never ending? What if there really is something more? What if there are no answers? Only more questions.
Ivan Turing, you're familiar with the name?
It's like a multi-billionaire.
He wants to talk to you.
I want to know what's going to happen to me after I die.
You and everybody else who ever lived.
The difference is, I have the resources to try to find out.
You're serious?
Don't you want to know if you were close to seeing your son again?
What you're asking is impossible.
Are you coming back?
What's going on with you?
Are you coming back?
She said that she was up near the ceiling and she could look down.
There's another life after this.
Are you coming back?
I wish you could see that.
If I have a bias, it's for science and rational thought.
Is it so hard for you to believe that there is something more?
Don't you pull that crap on me. I really wish I could take things on faith, but I can't. I need to know.
You want answers as much as I do, Dr. Tyler. Maybe more.
They told me not to talk to you. You know the trouble with just believing? It's too easy.
Well, as you can see, that's a pretty exciting television series. Just from that trailer, you could tell that a lot of the topics that we deal with as Christians, that we learn about from the Bible and from the words of Christ in the New Testament, they are approaching from a different perspective. And so it's an interesting series. I found it interesting. Some of the episodes were more interesting than the others, but overall, I would say it's a good television series, and I hope they renew it for a second season. And I hope that the American population gets to deal with these issues, because as it stands right now, our society is geared toward total secular and material. And there isn't time and there isn't reflection on the life to come, and there isn't reflection on spiritual reality. And so this is a good step in that direction. Now, some observations about the show. I want to spend the rest of the program talking about it. First of all, I think that I was shocked the way they portrayed the assumption right off the bat that everyone involved in this program, every character in the program, I should say, assumed, nearly everyone assumed that there was no life after death and that there was no kingdom of God and that there was nothing but the grave. That's what the lead character, the doctor, the woman doctor who is doing the research for the multi-billionaire who is dying with cancer, he hires her to find out one way or another evidence for life after death. He wants to know what's going to happen when he dies. Okay, so she is pursuing that research, but her assumption right off the bat as a doctor, as a medical doctor, is a total atheistic, secular view of no life after death. That's her assumption. And during the course of the series, we realized that all of these other doctors that are involved in the episodes, they don't believe in life after death either. Now, is that an accurate reflection or portrayal of the population of our country? I don't think so. I don't even think it's an accurate representation of the portrayal of the medical field. I don't think that most doctors are atheists. I don't think that most medical doctors disbelieve in life after death. I think there is a bias toward the secular and the materialistic, and to confine the discussion to this life and to the hard natural science. But I don't believe that the assumption in the medical community, by and large, among regular doctors and even specialists at hospitals, I don't believe that the consensus is there is no life after death. And even in her family, her little daughter, her teenage daughter, comes across like she doesn't believe in life after death. Well, maybe she wasn't raised to believe in it, and the husband, the ex-husband, comes across as he doesn't believe in life after death. So the whole assumption is that the fail-safe assumption of society and the world at large is that of disbelief in life after death, and I think that's an erroneous assumption. I think that's a misrepresentation of the American culture and the Western culture in general. That might be more so in Europe, but I don't believe in the United States most people disbelieve in life after death. I believe they do embrace it. Well, Don't go away. We'll be back for part 2 of Christian Answers in just a second. Now, one of the topics that we're talking about is this week, in fact, we're talking about life after death, and more specifically, we're talking about the series on TNT that just aired. It's over now. It's completed. It was 8 or 9 episodes, and it's called Proof, and the series is premised on a multi-billionaire, dying of cancer, hires a skillful neurosurgeon to investigate the question of whether there is life after death so that he knows what he's going into as he approaches death. He wants to know one way or the other, is there life after death, or is it just the grave? Is that the final resting place for him? Or is there a soul that goes on and lives beyond this world? Now, I said in the first segment that I was shocked at the assumption of the series. Now, this might reflect Hollywood. This might reflect the producers, directors, and the writers' view of reality. It might reflect a thoroughly secular, totally almost atheist view on the part of the Hollywood writers community and producers and directors and actors. But I don't believe it reflects an accurate representation of America, and I don't believe it represents the medical community either, by and large, and that is the assumption that there is no life after death. I don't believe that that's true. I believe that most people do believe that there is life after death, and you see that in culture all over the place. You people attend, millions upon millions upon millions of people attend church every Sunday. And church is a place that affirms life after death, and Christianity affirms life after death. Most people in this culture affirm Christianity. They identify with Christianity. And so they're identifying with a belief system that believes and affirms in life after death. And so I think the series presents a little bit of a distortion there and trying to come across in a thoroughly secular fashion. That might hold to some of the leading intellectual centers of the world, might hold to some of the higher levels of academia at universities, but I don't believe that that's an accurate representation of the culture in general. Now, one of the other things that I noticed about the series is that most of the references to life after death come in relationship to some kind of occultic phenomenon. And I think that's a shame. Because you don't have to go into that realm to talk about life after death. You don't have to go into that realm to carry on a discussion about life after death. After all, again, reference to Christianity, the church, theology. Western culture has been raised on Christian theology. We have a whole wide and thorough and sophisticated body of literature that covers life after death, and it deals with it from a theological perspective, from even a rational perspective. And so there is a wide body of literature. Great thinkers from the past 2,000 years in the West have addressed this issue. You don't have to go to the occult and to occultism and spiritism. In the series, for example, most of the illustrations of the pro side of the argument, pro meaning yes, there is life after death, most of those examples come from the world of the occult, where they have a medium, for example. One of the characters in the series is a medium. He is supposed to represent one of these popular sort of occultic mediums that you might see on Oprah, or you might see on Jerry Springer, where they come on and they try to tell people about others that have passed away and want to communicate to them, and they try to communicate that to the audience. And you've seen those kind of television shows where they have an occultic person, a medium, someone who claims that they can speak with the dead. And there are 2, 3, 4, 5 of these type of people running around the country, appearing on TV here and there on The Late Show and all over the place. And they put on a pretty impressive performance and convinced a lot of people that they're actually in communication with a departed soul. Well, those kind of people, there is a character in this series that sort of represents that aspect of the whole issue of life after death. And unfortunately, the series tends to defer to that kind of area when it talks about evidence for life after death. And that's a shame because, like I said before, Christianity has a much wider and deeper resource upon which to pull than the world of the occult. You know, this whole spiritistic movement is only about 150 years old or so, maybe 200 years old. And oddly enough, it began in upstate New York with some sisters, the Fox sisters, claiming that they were getting messages from beyond the grave. And so this whole modern spiritistic movement began, where you have people going into darkened rooms and they hold seances and they ask questions. People come in, they ask questions of the medium, and the medium supposedly communicates with the other side, the other side of life beyond the grave, and tells the person who is asking the question, answers the questions that they're asking based on the answers given to them by departed souls in this next life. And that whole aspect is mixed with the demonic from a Christian perspective. It's also got a mixture of performance and hucksterism and quackery and fake and fraud, and that's been proven. So you have a very questionable pool of resources in this area, and so I'm a little bit disappointed that the series includes that in such a prominent way. It's almost as if that's the only other place to turn to if you want to get some kind of testimonies. But again, Christianity has a plethora of resources. There are Christian testimonies of people who have experiences, near-death experiences, and all kinds of other things that are pertinent to this whole question. But more important than that, we have the resources of the Bible. We have a divine revelation from God. And most importantly, we have the instance in the case and the example of Jesus Christ and his resurrection. That has to be the number one evidence for life after death as far as Christians and their rational thought on the subject. We don't look to the world of the occult. We don't look to these so-called spirit mediums who claim that they can talk to the dead. We don't look to the Ouija board. We don't look to, these tarot cards, and we don't look to these fortune tellers for evidence for life after death. We look to the Bible, and the Bible tells us about Jesus Christ and his resurrection from the dead. So as Christians, we rationally go back to the case of Jesus Christ. That is the greatest example of resurrection, the greatest example of life from the dead. Because here was Jesus alive. Eyewitnesses saw him die, and then he was put in the grave, and then 3 days later he rose to life. That is a miracle, and he testified that he was going on to the kingdom of heaven and would be with the Father in heaven, and that we would join him after we die. So there is a credible evidence of life after death based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that's not just the only example in the Bible. There are other people that have died, and come back to life and testify to the existence of life beyond the grave. And so we have the Bible to tell us that. We don't need the occult world to tell us that. And so this series, unfortunately, turns to the occult. But don't go away. We're going to be back for part 3 of Christian Answers in just a minute. Welcome to part 3 of Christian Answers, and we're continuing our discussion of the series on TNT called Proof. The topic of this series, the subject of this series is life after death. Is there proof for it or not? A multi-billionaire hires a surgeon, a medical expert, to look at the evidence medically and scientifically and determine whether, in fact, there is or isn't proof of life after death. And so this woman looks at cases of near-death experiences also. And so she tries to conclude that if is any of that valid, is there any validity to what these people who have died either on the operating table or in their hospital room when their heart stopped or their brain activity stopped, and they were then taken, they testify, above the surgeons trying to revive them, and they were looking down upon their own body and looking down upon the doctors trying to treat them and bring them back to life. And so there are all these testimonies. There's just countless number of testimonies of people who have had near-death experiences. And in some of the books that have been around for decades now, there's a book by a person named Moody who has written on this subject. And there are a number of other books that best-selling books of late that have talked about near-death experiences and how the brain waves have ceased, and yet the person remembers events happening in their mind, even if there were no brain waves. And so there are some very interesting testimonies that we hear out there and we can read about in the popular literature. And so some of these cases this surgeon investigates, and she finds that some of these are valid. She finds that some of them cannot be totally disproved. That's the instance that she would conclude that this testimony is not fake or this testimony is not bogus. Now, some of the experiences that people reported, she did find solutions for in science. She found rational explanations found in, for example, one man was claiming that he was talking to his deceased wife. They found that he actually had some kind of a scarring tissue on his brain. They did an operation, removed the scar tissue, and he stopped hearing from his so-called departed soul that he was talking to. And so that was a debunking of evidence for life after death. But then in other instances, she found and experienced that they could not be explained away by science. So she is trying to use science as the means by which she determines whether there is in fact life after death. Now that's what this billionaire hired her to do, was to use just science. And I think that that is a limiting factor when you use just science. For example, science is very, very good at determining and classifying and analyzing things that have a material and natural basis for them. But what if something is not material? What if something is not a product of the natural world? What if it's a supernatural something? What if, for example, the human brain is a natural substance, but what if the mind is actually of another substance? What if the mind is something different from a natural occurring phenomenon? What if the mind is something beyond nature? So then natural science would have a hard time analyzing that. Natural science would have a hard time quantifying that, or even determining if it actually existed or not. But yes, indeed, we have thoughts, we have activity, we have thinking, we have reflecting, we have self-consciousness, and this is not just something occurring in the brain, although there are scientists, materialist scientists, who believe that the mind is simply reduced to the brain, that we just haven't understood all of the brain yet, and when we understand all of the brain yet, we will understand that it is actually the same thing as the mind. But that is not a proven scientific conclusion, and neither is the the idea that there is no life after death a proven scientific conclusion. And so this woman is going through all of the evidence that she can gather in a scientific way, in a research way, and trying to determine, is there any rational basis based on scientific evidence for the belief in life after death. And it's very interesting to see the kind of experiences that she encounters in her search. And I think this is a good topic for Christians to use as an evangelism tool for non-Christians, because after all, humanity has this in common. We all want to know about our ultimate destiny. I think everyone on the planet Earth walking around, whatever culture they're in, has a stake in this question. It's not like this question is totally irrelevant to everyone or anyone. It's totally relevant to everyone because everyone is going to die at some point. We're all going to die, and we're all going to know at some point whether there's life after death. Now, if there is no life after death, we're not going to know it, of course, but the Bible teaches that there is life after death and that we will stand before God one day and we will give an account. And those who have trusted Jesus Christ and have put their hope and trust in his atoning death on the cross, they will have forgiveness of sins, and they will have life eternal. Now, those who have rejected Jesus Christ and his atoning death on the cross and have not bothered with that or rejected that whole understanding of Christ needing to die on the cross for us as sinners, those people will not receive eternal life in heaven with God. They will go and be separated from God for all eternity, and they will be told to depart from God, and they will be banished from his kingdom. And so there is a big at stake. Everyone has a big stake in this whole question. It's not just the question of, is there life after death? It's the question of what kind of life after death will we experience? Will we experience the blessed life promised by God for those who put their trust in God? Or will we experience the cursed existence forever in the fires of damnation, the Bible teaches, for those who are reserved for the devil and his angels and all those unbelievers who rejected the grace of God? And so the question could not be more relevant to every one of us. And so this whole topic is totally relevant. And so we need to encourage people to think about it. And so if you have friends, if you have family members, if you have coworkers, if you have people you talk with on a daily basis, I would encourage you to start a conversation with them and talk to them about this series, and maybe even try to get a copy of this series to them and watch it with them, and then talk about it and raise this whole topic, and then talk in terms of how does Christianity relate to this whole topic? What does the Bible say about this topic? And why should we believe the Bible? The Bible is a very good source for answering this kind of a question, because we look at the Bible and we look at how it describes reality. It talks about the sinfulness of human beings. It talks about our own sinful nature. And when we look around the world, that is verified every day in the news. We realize, yes, indeed, we are sinners. We cannot even live up to our own moral standards, let alone God's. And we need a Savior. We need God to save us from our situation. Now, once we realize that that is a valid analysis of our human condition, then we turn to the Bible for other things. And we see that Jesus describes life after death, and he proves that there is life after death by dying and staying dead for 3 days, and then at the end of 3 days, rising from the dead, reporting about this, and then telling his disciples and everyone who will listen that there is a coming kingdom and that we need to be prepared. We need to use our time on earth here to prepare for the next life. And so I would encourage you to watch this series and talk about it, and we will see you back here next week on another episode of Christian Answers. God bless.